started, everyone. I'm going to introduce this session here, and we're going to move right into it. So this is called Shifting Narratives and Realigning Cultural Connectedness with Resiliency. It's going to be a discussion on cultural connectedness and acknowledging personal resilience during the seasons of change and challenge, exploration of cultural values and beliefs in relation to health and well-being. Our presenter today is Sheri Daniels, the Executive Director of Papa Ola Lōkahi. Sheri has been a leading Papa Ola Lōkahi Native Hawaiian Health Board since 2016. In this role, she leads the efforts to improve the overall health and well-being of Native Hawaiians and their family through strategic partnerships, programs, and public policy, both here in the ʻāina, Hawaiʻi, and across the United States. Our chat monitor for this room is Anela Nichols. You will see her there. We will promote you, Anela, in just a minute. And our two resource persons are Dr. Charmaine Bisson and Dr. Amber Kanamura. If you're feeling a bit tender and you need someone to talk to, just message myself or one of us into the chat, and we can move you into a virtual hallway where you can both talk until you're ready to come back into the session. So Sheri, at this point, I am going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, Velina Mai, everyone, welcome. It's a little nerve-wracking because I see 149 participants and I want to believe it's true, but man, that's a lot of pressure. So you guys are coming with me on a journey. I'm going to share my screen and then we'll get started. Okay. You guys are going to see probably the rest of my slides on your side, but can everybody see the screen? Danielle, can you see the screen? Okay. So we're going to walk through this journey. And I was sharing with Danielle, when I was putting this together, I was struggling in my own sense of really, what does that mean to shift our narrative, to reignite our cultural connectedness to resiliency? We hear all these buzzwords, but what does it really mean? What does it feel like? What does it mean in the day-to-day things that you do, not only professionally, but also personally? How do I make that, how do I crosswalk that for everyone? And then after listening to Dr. Myers.
Sheri, if I could just interrupt you just very briefly, could you put this in presentation mode for us?
Sure, let me see, you gotta help me do this.
So you go to slideshow.
Oh.
And then click from.
Not presenter mode. Oh,
from,
sorry.
There you go.
Is that what it is?
Yep, that's what it is.
Okay.
It's perfect.
Oh, okay. Okay, perfect. Sorry. Technical difficulties. Thanks, Danielle. Appreciate it. And so when I joined this morning and listened to Dr. Myers talk about really the awamo, the kuleana we have and the shared purpose, it clicked for me. Like, this is about a continued conversation. I don't think any one of us is going to get the answers today. I don't think it's something that's just going to fall in our lap. I think it's a continuation of, one, your own awareness of self and where you're at and what that means and how you add to your path, how do you add to your toolkit, all of those things. So today we're going to be talking about what does that mean. This is the first part. The second part of this presentation is actually going to be continued at the Ho'oi Kaika Convention or conference that Venus folks are putting on later in October. So let's get started. First of all, when we talk about what we're going to talk about today, the first thing is knowing yourself, right? Knowing who you are, what you stand for, where your truths and your beliefs are. And I think that's really important when we talk about the topic of suicide and suicide prevention, because oftentimes we come with our own biases and our own beliefs, and we have to somehow quickly figure out the person we're talking to, the family we're working with, and how we bridge that. And so if we understand very clearly where our own strengths are, but also our own areas of challenge, of what you're working on, those things help you be better, not only in the work in crisis intervention, but kind of everywhere. It's a universal, you can apply it universally. So knowing yourself, I think that's really important. I saw in the chat, people were putting where they were from. If you want to continue to do that, but what I also want people to do is to give one word. If you could give a word to anyone today, what would that word be? And keep it positive. we want to promote that, right? We want to promote what does it mean to create resiliency, and resiliency is it's building blocks. So in the chat, if you can throw in, if you haven't already, introduce yourself, where you're from, because we're hoping to create networks with other people here. You have theoretically 150 other people that you can connect with. And that's going to be really important. So, and also please throw in a word of the day. That's your kuleana in this part of the presentation. So when we go to presentations and we listen to these subject matter experts and we try to garner all their ike and their knowledge and, you know, what makes them important, what makes what they have to say valuable to me. And I gotta say, I've sat in many conferences and workshops and trainings, and the one thing that I always, I think, enjoy the most, probably in my comments, give feedback on, is I kind of want to know a little bit more about the person who's talking to me, who's sharing their ike with me, even if it's something not as exciting, like say data. And some people, data might be exciting. I want to find a way to connect. And that's the first word of the day, connection. As Kanaka, we often have this a bit need to connect. I tell people all the time, I kind of call us pack animals in the best sense of the word, because we always want to be collective. We want to be around people. We want that energy that other people bring. And it's the need to connect. It's the need to establish trust. And when you work with communities, culturally diverse communities, or communities like Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, and others like ours, the need to connect is really important. So this is my connection with you folks. When I look at who I am as a person, as a Kanaka, as a professional, it's a lot, right? But I'm also somebody who likes things visually. I like pictures. I think pictures tell tons of stories. And so for me, pictures are connecting and pictures tell a story. So if you look at my story, and this is just a very quick snapshot, right? That's the other thing pictures do. Pictures are a snapshot into that person's life at the moment. And so my little collage of pictures is me introducing myself to you and building connection. So you guys, I think were introduced to me as Dr. Sheri Daniels. I think I'm comfortable and probably more comfortable in just Sheri. I think when we look at the world in which we live, it's great to have the alphabet soups. It's great to have all of those things. But for myself, that's not necessary to connect. Connection is more about what makes the person who they are versus all of those other things. So for me, for front and center, when you look at my collage, you see me with my family. I have 4 keiki, and actually there's 3 in there, and my other keiki is right above holding his kahili. But I have 4 keiki, and for those that don't know me well enough, all my keiki were adopted from birth. I got to watch them come into this world, and I think there's something about being offered an opportunity to share somebody's life. Somebody maybe you don't know, you've never met. And in that moment, you have this connection that you'll always have. And that's that we share these children. I may not have carried them, but I've raised them. And so I think that's kuleana. When Dr. Myers talked about kuleana, that's kuleana, and our shared kuleana and shared purpose. You know, I often use the words or the phrase, you know, people come into your life for a season, reason, or lifetime. And that's really what it is to understand where we connect and have shared purpose. And then my husband and I have been together since we were in the 10th grade. And, you know, I often thought that was not unusual. And I think I find it more unusual as the years go on. I'm professionally, I sit on a lot of boards, a lot of things, but I think for me, my 2 passions are I'm one of the leads for the Hawaii COVID-19 team for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders. And then I also oversee Papa Ola Lōkahi. With that, I think for me, my biggest kuleana is helping to solidify, perpetuate, understand what it means to be Kanaka and how we navigate in the world. And not only the challenges that we have, but what are the things we celebrate? And I think resiliency is one of them. I think we coined the word resiliency before it was even popular. And so I think, you know, when I look at that bottom picture, it's myself and some of my staff when we went to DC in the summer to really pay tribute to our ali'i. And I think it's those kinds of moments to really appreciate who you are as a Hawaiian. I think we all in one shape or form not only have happiness in life and the joy and all that excitement, but we also have sorrow. We all have it. And my one black and white photo is me saying goodbye to my dog last year. And I think, you know, grief is grief, however small it may be or however large it is. And I think when we don't recognize that grief is there, it's something that we carry with us. And that's something we need to also address along with the highs and the lows. And that's what helps keep you centered and moving forward. I think the other big part of my life is my mom and my grandmother, who's up in the upper part of my collage. And I think it's really important to recognize where I come from and to be steadfast in that, because oftentimes we try to do better, be better, and not really recognize that there was a path that was already carved for us. And what does that look like as in the work that I do, in the relationships that I hold? And relationships, right? Whether it's somebody I just meet in line at Safeway, or it's somebody that I've had this relationship with for 20, 30 years. It's what you bring to the table and how authentic you are about it. I think oftentimes as humans, it's so easy to try to hide or try to put on a show or cover up. But when you're not really authentic outwardly, you're more likely not authentic inwardly. And I think that's what part of today's discussion is, or sharing is that ability to know yourself and to live in that truth. So today, when we talk, I want to lay some ground rules. And I know I don't have a lot of time, but again, this is just the first conversation. I want to talk about lens of perspective. When we work in the fields of trauma, crisis intervention, addiction, all of those often negative pieces to our social structuring, right? That we're hearing stories of struggle. And at the end of the day, that's what it is. And it's connected to trauma. And trauma has many different faces. So today, when we talk about what we're talking about, please note that my lens of perspective is coming from all of those experiences that I've had working with people that may have had more trauma, more grief, more impacts on their lives than maybe I've experienced or not. But that those are all the lenses of perspective that I'm bringing in. Also for myself, my disclaimer is for my own space, I'm also coming from a lens of a Native Hawaiian, wahine, a mother, sister, all of those things. And so I also recognize that I might have biases and beliefs that may differ from everyone. And I'm putting it out there. And part of it is also recognizing that we may be different. And that's okay, because that's part of our beliefs. But our shared values, and I'm going to make this reach here, that if you're on the call today and you're listening to the multiple presentations that's going to happen, we have a shared value. And that's to better understand this topic of suicide prevention and to support and be there to support those that are struggling with it. So I think we have that shared value, but we may have different beliefs. And then what I'm hoping to get out of the time is, one, to raise consciousness, to just create this aha moment where you go, do I really believe what she just said? How do I apply that to what I know or what I've experienced? So raising conscious level of thinking. Hopefully we create questions. Questions might not come up today. Questions might be tomorrow. Questions might be next week when you go, this is what I heard somewhere else. So creating questions for yourself. I'm hoping that you gain one piece of self-awareness. And it can be big, it can be small, it can be one of the positive words that was given today. So one piece of self-awareness. And I'm hoping, and this is a big hope, that you guys can connect with somebody here on this presentation or throughout the day when you go to the spaces, okay? And then for our purpose together, one, permission for safe space. Again, we may have very different beliefs or understandings, and that's okay. That's part of learning, is to understand that, but also stay true to yourself and what space you're in. Have thoughtful presence, connect to yourself, and again, connection and trust. That's really what we're looking at in core learning today. I also hope that you gain an understanding of, for yourself, where you see your place in the work that you're doing. And my last comment on this might not be a technical workshop, meaning I might not refer you to the DSM or to data sets or to those practical technical things. Today's conversation is really about the turning it inward and being reflective, so that when you do the work internally or you have some thoughts around it, the outwardly work that you do with others will hopefully be enhanced. So again, if you're looking for a technical one, I am so sorry, Dr. Deb's one is sold out, or not sold out, but closed. So you're stuck with me, sorry. Okay, let's get started. At the end, I wanna see if you guys see the pieces that I've put together for us today. So we're gonna start with the kahua. Well, we started with the honua, right? We did the ground cover, we did the groundwork. We laid the foundation. Well, we laid the ground. Now we're laying the foundation. And the foundation is about cultural, connectedness, and resiliency, right in the titles. So when we talk about cultural is diversity. Yes, we might be coming from a place of Native Hawaiian, but we also have Pacific Islanders. We also have Asians. We have the melting pot in which we live here in Hawaii. So cultural, right? We're talking about diversity and culture. So the one thing I got to put out here, and I've said it many times, I don't really like the word competence. And that's why when you see on the slide, I kind of cross that out. Because in order to have competency, you have to have demonstrated something, right? You often take a test, you go to a class and you learn cultural competency. That's great, but you don't learn it in an hour. Cultural learning, and there's a lot of new buzzwords: cultural humility, cultural resiliency, cultural alliance. I just use cultural, right? Let's just keep it universal. So to understand cultural knowledge, cultural awareness, it's really looking at yourself and looking at your own beliefs and values around diversity. What does that mean to you? And we know over the last 2 years, diversity has really been pushed to the forefront when we talk about diversity and inclusion. We saw that with a lot of the social injustices we've seen across the country. But let's look back at our own Native Hawaiian history. Cultural diversity and struggles, we know historically has been from pre-overthrow through the overthrow to current, right? We've seen these milestones in our own history of injustices, right? But those injustices also create diversity in our culture. You know, we often look to our kupuna ike to really help us kind of figure out where we go, right? And this morning we heard about collective experiences. All of those experiences, good and bad, is what creates our diversity and what adds to the culture. So when we look at cultural, we got to keep in mind that it's broad, but it's foundational for the work you do, the people you engage with, and really from the space that you're coming from. Connectedness doesn't mean that you're going to expect to connect with people immediately. It's about trust. That's the other big word, right? I mentioned. Trust is not something that we earn or gain in, you know, a 2-minute conversation with somebody. It's something we gain over time. But also trust is also carried, especially in our community, in our cultural values, that it's based on previous engagements or previous workings with that person. We often connect somebody with what we know about them. So I might, and I'm going to use Danielle because she's over here, that I might have worked with Danielle 2 years ago and found that she was wonderful. We connected, we're able to have conversations. You know, when we had to pull things together, she was right there. And I'm going to carry that with me moving forward. So when I have to connect with her again, I already have that established trust. But you're not going to have that with somebody in 2 minutes or 3 minutes. So that's something to really keep in mind, that trust is really important, and it's inclusion. So when you're working with families and individuals, especially around topics like this that are very passionate, it's emotionally driven, we got to really be conscious and mindful of inclusion. And inclusion means that just because you have the alphabet soup after your name, or that you are the person helping the situation, that you don't always have the answers. Inclusion means really finding out from them, what is it that it means to them, and seeing how you can weave that into how you work with them. And I think that's really important. And then third, resiliency. Resiliency is about having growth despite. So we look at this picture, and I think the picture is amazing because it's about resiliency, right? That in this kind of, you know, really stark environment, that we can have growth. We can have new growth. And that's what resiliency is. That resiliency is about growth, because it's not about sustainability, right? It's not about the long term, It's about how we strengthen what we have, good and bad. Resiliency isn't just about, you know, capturing the good and that's what we go with. Resiliency is about, yes, capturing the good, but it's also capturing the not good. Because when we capture the not good, we're able to grow. It's an opportunity for that. So resiliency, I'm tagging it as growth despite, and you can fill in the blank for yourselves, right? So think about it. I'm going to give you like 10 seconds. Think about that. What is it in my own space? Was there growth despite? Did you have growth despite feeling like you weren't worthy enough? Or did you have growth despite having 1,000 things on your plate, but you needed to focus on one? So those kinds of examples is what you want to look at when you think about resiliency. So I like to put in these little purposeful stops because we hear a lot of talking, right? So this purposeful stop. Koenai ke kuleana o nā kanaka. Preserving the rights and relationships and responsibilities of Native peoples, past, present, or future. And I like to like cite who I find it from, and so it's down there. But you know, I think this is one of those take pause moments, because when we talk about rights and relations and responsibilities, those seem so large. But if you break it down to just how we engage with people, just one-on-one, in the line at Safeway, right? That's what you're looking at. No matter if it's in the line or at Safeway, or you're engaging with a client in crisis, in active crisis, or you're dealing with a policymaker, right? That at the end of the day, it's about the consistency you bring in, you know, preserving their rights, the relationship with them, and the responsibility you have to really set the tone. And that's what, when we talk about creating or reigniting that connectedness to resiliency, right? It's taking the moment, the 2 seconds to just recenter yourself in any of those situations you come up with. Okay, purposeful stop, moving on. So we talked about the ground, the foundation, and now pokihi. Pokihi is often known as the cornerstones, right? So it's narrative pillars. These are what is the values that you bring. Maybe you have 2, maybe you have 4, maybe you have 100 of these values, but values are your core concepts. I also want to point out that oftentimes values may be intangible. Now, you might go, what does that mean, right? Well, it's that as a Kanaka, you often feel this gut. I have my gut instinct. It's down in my na'au. It's when you've done something or said something and you just like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. It's that instant intuition, some people call it, right? Or instinct. But it's that feeling you get in your gut, in your core, in that part of you as a kanaka that is part of your piko, right? That's what that values are. So it's inward, not in your brain. It's often a feeling. And that's what the intangibility is. It's often, I can't describe it. I can't pull up a research article on it, or I can't pull up literature or data on it, because it's just, I know it. And that's what these values are often, is that pokihi, those pillars, okay? And then the pa, these are often the narratives. These are what I consider beliefs. And a pa, and in this concept, the pa is the walls, right? Because your beliefs and your experiences that shape your beliefs often can be changed. And that's why I put, like, you can paint, you can refresh, right? Paint peels, what do? You scrape them and you start new. You know, you rearrange the furniture in your hale. That's right. Those are the beliefs that oftentimes your beliefs may shift based on an experience you've had. So when we compare it to values, values are maybe not as shiftable. Beliefs are. And beliefs often, or this narrative often, is less in spaces that matter because they're learned. They are attributed to behavior. You respond, your actions. And it's not often in spaces that it doesn't matter. What do I mean by that is, you may tell something, you know, I really believe the sky is blue. The sky is blue, and I know this because this, and this happened. Well, I might ask you another day, and maybe you say, you know what? The sky's not really blue. It's really this. And this is how I know this, right? So when we talk about beliefs, we're talking about things that can be shifted, things that are not like in your core. They're often up here. They're often reactions or based on experiences that you've had. So that's the pa, the walls. So taking a breather, read this. It's okay if you thought you were over it, but it hits you all over again. It's okay to fall apart even if you thought you had it under control. You're not weak. Healing is messy, and there's often no timeline for healing. I stuck that in because we often think, especially when we talk about suicide prevention and we talk about just crisis, right? Because there's often the precipitation of what leads to having to talk about suicide and what all of that encompasses. And sometimes as professionals, but also especially as the person, when you're walking through it, you know, to say, you know, you got to get over it, this is how you do it. No, we know that sometimes it's not as easy as that, that it's going to be messy. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be all of this. And we don't have a crystal ball to say, well, it's going to take us 3 days and 12 hours. Or, you know what, this healing that you need or this grief you're experiencing is, let me check my timeline. Oh, yeah, it's usually between, you know, 5 months and 5 years. We don't have that. And everybody is different. And that's really important. And I think this is where also looking at your own self around, you don't have to, you know, be on it all the time. I think part of what this is also saying is you got to give yourself permission sometimes to just not be present. And it's okay. And that's part of our own self-reflection when we talk about what our kuleana is, what are we trying to awamo, to carry up. And sometimes it just might be doing absolutely nothing, right? In the moment for yourself, because it's kind of like when you ride the airplane. And I'm sure of the 146 people here, everybody has at least ridden the airplane or been in a situation where, like the flight attendant will say, you got to put the mask on if you're going to, before you do help somebody else do theirs. Because if you don't, then it's not that you're gonna be no use to help somebody else. And so that's what this is. It's not only to the person you're working with, but to your own self. It's okay. Healing is messy. Grief is messy. All of it's messy. All this topic is messy. Let's just be real about that. I don't think we're not clued into that. So just keep that in mind. The kaupoku. So this is often the action. And it's about safety. Oftentimes, the things that you do provides for safety. And you see the picture, so I think you kind of see where my visual is going, is that you're often integrating culture with your learned experience, right? And this is where culturally we think, well, one, I'm Hawaiian, so I should know, so therefore I do know. And that's not often true. Like Dr. Meyer said, everybody's different. The way we see things, the way we interpret things range from if you live in one community versus another community, a different island, let alone from just different parts of the country, of the world. So integrating culture is, yes, it includes the learned experience, and that's why it varies. And that's why we look at values. Cultural values often are pretty standard across, but it's the learned experience, the beliefs that we try to weave in with culture. And some of it you can't teach, not that you can't learn, you can have awareness, but it's teaching this. For example, that na'au awareness, I can't teach you to have that. People have it. It's like certain aspects, I also say this a lot, aloha. I can't teach you to have aloha. I can help you understand what aloha means to you, how you incorporate it, how you weave it into your life, how you use it in your everyday work. Like, I can't teach aloha. Aloha is that feeling. It's that way of being, and those things aren't what you teach. You come with it, and you expand, and you grow your ike and your willingness to want to grow and learn. That's what you're able to teach, and that's what you're able to discern from folks. So this is a primer to, okay, so what did she talk about, right? What did she talk about in the last handful of slides? I hope people are getting it. I'm going to see who puts it in the chat. Put down in the chat what you think we built over the last few slides. Okay, let's see. Ahale, exactly. Thanks, Ui. Ahale. So if you think about it, there's many ways we can think about how we provide support and resiliency. But ahale, when I think of ahale, I think of it as a punana, a nest of sorts, right? Because in this nest, you're learning, and you're learning good and bad. You're learning a range of things. Your hale can be part of a community, of a kauhale, right? You can have multiple hales that make up. And if you think about Hawaiian communities and Hawaiian culture, that often includes ohana at different levels, the aunties, the uncles, tutu guy's house, right? And if you think about what happens is ohana's goal, right? We congregate at people's hales. Hales become the center point. And in the hale, oftentimes there's spaces that are really the gathering ground. And the gathering ground can be the kitchen table in tutu's hale with the big bowl of poi, right? And the conversations around it. It could be in the garage where uncles and the cousins all come and they kani kapila and they have that, right? So that's for me, that's why I use the hale, because the hale has a lot of those refuge, Vernon Perfect. It's that refuge that comes in from a cultural perspective. And this is one way to look at it. When we look at our families or the people that we engage with and that are touched by this topic we're listening to today, right? What are they seeking? They're seeking refuge of some sort, right? Refuge to help them heal, refuge to help understand, refuge to walk through whatever they need, right? That's what, for myself, and that's why I use the Hale. It's the kukulu komuhana, absolutely. That we're coming together in this collective space. And that's what the resiliency and the connectedness is. Connectedness can only happen when you make the conscious connections and then you roll it out into the work and the relationships that you have, right? Exactly. And you're right. One of the comments, well, hopefully, yes. Again, not all hales are safe. Not all spaces are safe. But I think if you're coming in the work that's being done, how do you help create that? How do you help recognize when that isn't there? Right? So that is the importance of that is if you're, and this goes back to self-care, if you understand where you stand, what ground you're on, then your ability to connect and be able to be aware of that with the people you're engaging with, that's going to help them develop those resiliency components. Not easy. And I don't think anybody or anyone here recognizes it's an easy task at all. But hopefully there's tools that you can employ to help you become more aware of that. So now, I guess I got to shut this off, sorry. So now what, right? So now what? You know, I often like this picture because it's like that breaking of the dawning of the new day, right? That you've listened for the last 30 minutes. And so now what? Great. So what does it mean? Well, now the work's on you. Now I've created this package for you to unwrap yourself. So you determine your space, your place, your lens of perspective. And what does that mean? It means if you have that nagging in your na'au, well then what does that mean to you? How does it feel? What do you do with that? Does it mean that you need to know what your own grief, your own trauma, your own joy, your happiness, all of those things? And what does that mean when you bring that to the table? And where does the alignment come in? Right? And that's part of recognizing your space, your place, who you are. That's all part of that package. Excuse me. And then really what we're looking at is resiliency. At the end of the day, what does resiliency mean to you? What does connectedness mean to you? So maybe today's conversation actually has created more thoughtful questions that maybe you want to explore a little bit more, or, you know, so that's our conversation today. I think I'm ahead of time, maybe just a little. And I wanted to see, Amanda, Danielle, I don't know if people can put in questions if they have it. I know there's a lot of comments in the chat, so thank you.
Right, absolutely. The chat's been blowing up, which has been great. Yeah, very, very interactive. So I have my chat monitor monitoring the chat. I can unmute her if she needs to. And if you have any Q&A questions, you know, you can put your questions in the Q&A box and I can ask them to Sheri, or we could, you can put them in the chat and I can unmute my chat monitor and she can ask Sheri. So go ahead if you have any questions at all. I just absolutely love this, Sheri, because, you know, we talk so much about resilience when we do a self-care for youth training at Mental Health America of Hawaii, which is a protective factor training, really. And I just was able to do it for almost all the students at Molokai High School last week. And, you know, when I think of resilience, I think of they learn those tools, they learn those protective factors, and what that can help them do is sometimes overcome a particular problem or challenge that they might have, right? So giving them those building blocks.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we often think it has to be so, there has to be more to the recipe, right? we think that you have to put all these ingredients in. But I think one of the best meals I've had is the simplest, right? Growing up, and it's, you know, corned beef and onions. Okay, might not be the healthiest. It's not about health today, but in a different way. But right, it's the corned beef and onion. It's the frying Portuguese sausage. It's the cutting I mean, it's those simple things with just rice, right? That you don't have to have it be so convoluted, because oftentimes this kind of work, like I said, is messy. So when you add more mess to it, it really almost muddies up the water. So you really don't know what you need to focus on. Keeping it simple, keeping it actionable, keeping it real. I think that's the other thing. And I mentioned that earlier, right? We try to put up all these facades and all these walls when at the end of the day, right? As you go through your life, by the time you're older, and maybe this is my stage of life, right? As you get older, all the things that were so necessary aren't. And I think that's what we have to focus on, right? That sometimes the answer is so simple. It's right in front of us, but we spend so much time creating the dust around it.
Yep, I agree. And I think that you could say as we get older, because I am definitely in that group. So I see we have some really good comments. I don't see any questions yet. I think we would have wanted to be over at Joe B's house last night because she had corned beef and onions and she said it was delicious. So thanks, Joe B, for that. We have, let's see, Misty from Kahaliakeola Homeless Resource Center. She said, words and thoughts during this time, embrace the genuinity, always practice self-awareness and share my purpose and gifts and gratitudes always. Jenny Bissell, mahalo Sheri, a joy seeing you in actions for 10 plus years, bravo. And then Venus, if you want to put in the chat, somebody else is looking how to register for your conference. We have no problem with sharing that, and I see you did. Let's see. Can you share the slides, like in a PDF? Maybe email those to me.
I can.
And then what we'll do is when we reach out and send the people, you know, the recordings, because we're recording all the sessions except for Dr. Debs.
Yeah.
So we can send the slides to this in a PDF and the recordings as well, so they would have it.
I see one question.
Okay, good.
In the chat. This is Anella. Thank you.
Thank you, Anella.
From Vernon Viernes. He asked, what do you need to get through the next minute? I think, like, regarding, maybe if he wants to explain more.
Yeah, if he could explain, because my mind went to like 10 different things around what that could mean. You know, I think getting through the minute here. So for time-wise, I think engagement, I think Danielle and I filling the space and having conversation. But I think the other thing, it might be what you ask somebody, right? When they're in the moment. What do you need to get through this minute? What can I help you with to get through this minute? I think that's a real question.
Oh, and he says when someone is in crisis.
Right, right. And that's that I think is very appropriate, right? But I think that's also builds trust and it builds connectedness. Because on some level, you're also asking them, what is it that you need in the minute to help you get through it, right? So I think it's chunking it to baby steps, right? We hear this a lot in recovery when we talk about a day at a time, right? Some people say a week at a time, but for some people, a minute is impossible to fathom, right? So to ask them, what can I help you in a minute? And when you ask that, you've already taken up 20 seconds. And by the time they think about it, and they might say, I don't know. And Vernon, this is where you can say, look, we just made it through a minute. So how about we do one more minute, right? So it's those pieces that you can use, that you can apply. You know, I often think, and this is cultural too, Hawaiians, we're good at storytelling. We're good at talking story, right? your intent to be 15 minutes, you're 45 minutes later. But see, the 45 minutes is rich. We've gone all over the place. We've gone on the drive to Hana in that 45 minutes. And if you just sat and listened, you would have got a lot of things that maybe asking somebody straight down the pipa, like, okay, I got to ask you these 10 questions. I always tend to put those aside when I've worked with in the community and with folks, because talking story, just tell me, right? And I started random places like, hey, tell me about this. And you get them talking, and next thing you know, you're on their ride to Hana. And, you know, when you're done and I look at the paper, I often can answer everything because it was just talking. And as Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, a lot of our Pacific people, that's who we are. We like to talk and tell stories. So that's part of connectedness and resiliency.
All right, we have another one here. So in the beginning, you mentioned the views of culture. What do you think of cancel culture in the building to an authentic Hale?
You know, I think there's a lot of ways that there is a lot of cancellation of culture. I mean, or our cultural misappropriations. We see that a lot in just everyday space and what we do. I think authenticity is a really huge outcome to achieve, because in order to get authenticity collectively, it's not just you. So it's easy to become authentic, to create that authenticity for yourself. The challenge becomes when other people aren't at the same space that you're at, or at the same stage of creating that authenticity. That's a challenge. And then two, you also have to change the systems in which that authenticity happens and is normalized. And so I think that is something amazing to want to achieve. I think you also have to be a realist in what do we need to do to get there. And I think having conversations like this, having conversations with yourself, with your ohana, with your really close friends, because you know, one of the things that COVID has really highlighted that I've heard a lot recently is, especially in ohanas that are inadvertently divided around to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, right? That people are really surprised that their family members or their really good friends, they're really struggling with, that's not what I thought they would do, right? So, you know, I think being authentic is really important, because then that raises the question of, was it really authentic? And what does it mean to be authentic for yourself, but also what is the other person's interpretation of being authentic? So, you know, I think it's amazing possibilities and outcomes. I think we also have to be real what that means for myself, for you, for our community, and how do we achieve that collectively, knowing that not everybody going to be riding the train with us. So.
All right, thanks, Sheri. And then we have another one from Deborah Lynn. When we do build the place for connectiveness, then we have somewhere to examine the foundations that brought us there. Then when do we rebuild the place or renovate?
Well, when you recognize that you need to. So, right, not everybody's going to renovate. I might choose to, you know what? It's the character. It's what I bring to the table. And you can choose to live in that. I think you choose to renovate when what it is not safe anymore, or it's not meeting who you are at the moment, or what you recognize as being truthful to yourself. That's when the renovation happens. Because a lot of times, right, somebody might renovate 5 times in 5 years. And, you know, that's when you got to go, is that renovation or change because that's what you authentically decide to do? Or are you doing that because you're trying to meet some other, you know, beliefs that has shifted for you? So that's where, you know, really looking at the purpose of why you're doing what you're doing and how you make those changes and how you help your clients or your community make those changes, and having those, I think, transparent, honest conversations about that, which is part of the challenge, right? Because you got to be vulnerable and you got to have safe space and you got to be connected and have trust.
Perfect. Thank you, Sheri. I got another question, but I think it was more directed possibly towards me or our agency. This is from Miko Z. Where do we connect with Maui's resource services to volunteer? I'm not sure who you mean by Maui Resource Services. Do you mean us at Mental Health America of Hawaii or the Prevent Suicide Maui County Task Force? You can maybe drop that in the chat. And then, because if it's with us at Mental Health America of Hawaii or with the task force, I'm glad to drop my email into the chat if someone wants to get a hold of me. And so I'll do that right now.
And I'll drop, just for folks, I'll drop my email in the chat.
Perfect. We have another comment we have by Karen. I love how being a Kanaka really encompasses the desire to share such a full cultural experience. Love and appreciate it. That must be the talk story part of the connection. Yeah.
Well, but it's about, it's powerful in its own right. I mean, we all, right, had moments of listening to Manu this morning of like chicken skin or like going, oh my gosh, or like that kind of pause moment. I think that's the richness about having diversity in a conference where you can weave in the technical, practical use stuff and this is what I call the gray mass, the smooshy kind of, that touchy-feely smooshy stuff. You need that. You need to figure out the balance between the two.
Exactly. Another one comment here, and this is from, oh, I can't quite see. Oh, here we go. We can only obtain authenticity if we allow the walls to come down to the fear of not being superficial, not to conform to society's belief, but rather than to love who you are and in and out of the holly. Oh, how true. Yeah. Really.
And that's hard. That's hard work to do. I mean, we all, I'm sure, have moments of going, of putting ourselves in that space. It's so easy to like, right? You go home, you take off everything and you just wearing your bus up clothes, your whatever. But when you come out, it's like you see a very different persona. I often hear it professionally as, in the safe spaces, you just like, you let the pigeon rip. And then in the spaces of, right, you gotta be, it's much more thoughtful in how you respond, right? And I think that's where oftentimes people, it's a hard space to navigate. You want to be authentic in who you are, and yet some spaces you're not. One of my staff, and I got to give her kudos, Kim Burney, used to always tell me, one of the cool things about working at the organization that I run is we can be unapologetic about being Kanaka, about being Hawaiian, that Hawaiians is who we support, is what our mission is. Like we can just be unapologetic about that. And you know what? That is so true. And I think when you have that freedom and the permission to be able to do that, it makes some of the navigation in those spaces a lot easier. Not totally, smooth sailing, but it gives you that feeling that, what, I got all my ancestors behind me. I know what I'm doing, and what I'm doing is in the best of intentions, and it's from a Pono perspective, right? So I think that's also really important.
Awesome. I don't see any other comments. Thank you, Miko, for your email address. I will copy that and keep that here with me. And that way I'll have it. If there's any other comments or questions, we do have like 4 minutes left, actually. Anything else any other comments or anything anybody wants to say in the chat or anything of that? Definitely want to thank you today, Sheri, for coming and presenting. I mean, we're such a long ways from where our original conversation was.
Oh, yeah.
I know, I mean, I was so excited this morning. I could hardly sleep last night, and I was like so tired when I got here, but just, you know, just at that moment, I was doing some deep breathing, you know, before we began, and just seeing how many people have come and embraced us here today. We had well over 300 people register. So far, I think I've seen over 250 come to the conference. It's really, really great. And I thank you for being a part of it. Other comments that are coming in, just some thank yous. Mahalo nui, Sheri, thank you. Someone thinks I'm a doctor. I'm not a doctor. It's just Danielle. There is a Dr. Danielle Bergen in Colorado, but that's not me. Thank you for sharing your heart and passion, Sheri. Beautiful presentation filled with such aloha and integrity. Mahalo for sharing your gift of wisdom. Mahalo nui. So what we'll do here is, you know, we want to thank everybody for coming. We'll be going to showing, since this is the main room, we're going to be showing some of our